Thank you all for coming, and I'll hand over to Matt.
Thanks, mate. Kia ora, everybody. Just wanted to touch base with you in regard to the steering group that has been meeting regularly to look at the opportunities to build capacity capability in the not-for-profit sector in Marlborough. So there is a group that meets, which is a partnership, a group which has got a number of people in the room here on that, but also funders like ourselves, so Rātā from the Rātā Foundation, Department of Internal Affairs, Marlborough District Council, and then a number of other groups that are really interested in making sure that the opportunities that we provide fit and meet the needs that we're seeing across Marlborough in terms of the community organisations. So this Governance Bites is part of that. Rātā Foundation funded this. Really great to be working with Volunteer Marlborough on that. A couple of other projects that have come out of that are the Youth on Boards programme, which Meg just talked about, and also the Community Mentor Pilot, which Brian through the Marlborough Business Trust are leading. And so at the moment there's lots of learning for us all going on about how Youth on Boards could work, how community mentors can provide the needs for our community, and how governance can be strengthened as well. So at the end of the year, what we're looking to do as a steering group is have another meeting like we did about a year and a half ago, which is basically going to say what we've done and what those needs are looking like over the next wee while. So please look out for that. Make sure that you keep an ear on what's going on and come along to that. It'll be really good to get participation in that so that we can understand those needs and build into the program that we want to deliver over the next few years. Another thing is that from a Rātā Foundation perspective, we've got our kind of meeting up in Marlborough coming up in October. I think it's around mid-October, so please look out for that invite if you haven't seen it already. Please come along, it'll be a really good evening and be able to touch base again as well. So thanks for that. I just wanted to touch base and say g'day and put the context of this in terms of a wider sort of provision of activities that's going on for the sector up in Marlborough. So thanks. Cool.
Thank you. So I'll be staying. Unlike last month, when I didn't even quite get here, I was kidnapped by Air New Zealand, and they held me to ransom in Wellington, which is the way I get here. So apologies to people who turned up last month. That also slightly affects our plans because we could just add another one on, but that would mean having one hanging loose in the beginning of next year. So we're probably going to finish as we originally planned in December. So that's 3 more, including tonight. No, after tonight. October, November, December. Yeah, that's right. So tonight we're looking at getting the right people on board, and next month we'll be looking at getting the wrong people off board. Or overboard, and then I thought if people are happy from what the mix of ones that were identified, that something around confident oversight of the finances and a little bit about stewardship we might do is the November one, and then for December I'll try and do one that kind of draws together a little bit, and we'll look at self-evaluation of the board, but then we can look across all the different areas about how boards can work well. Does that sound like a reasonable? We'll have that as a plan. Great. Okay. The other thing, the added complication tonight is, as usual, you have a colour-in placemat in front of you, provided for your entertainment. But this placemat applies to this month and next month. So the big challenge is to remember to bring it back next month. Now, I will have a few spare copies in case there's any new people or some of you forget, but rather than waste trees, I won't do another whole set for everyone. So if you can remember to bring it back next time. And if we can remember, we will put on the notice to those who already have a placemat to bring it along, and you'll know what that means. Because this placemat deals with both the getting on board and the getting off board. So that's the reason for that. Okay, so let's get down to business then. Getting the right people on the board. So what I'd like you to do is the tables that have got 3, just have a chat in the 3, and this table with 4 if you would go into pairs. And what I'd like you to do is just to recall your last experience of being recruited for anything. So a job, a volunteer position, onto a board or committee or any kind of task. So just think about the last time you were recruited for something and what was the good, the bad and the ugly about that process from your point of view as someone. What helped or hindered?
I thought that the problem at the volunteer sector particularly is that so many volunteers who put yes without actually finding out whether you've got the skills that are needed.
All right, yep. So, not matching to the task and the skills.
It's probably driven by a shortage of people, and as I say, it's the same in the employment sector at the moment too, where you get applications for a job, you just make sure you're vetting out the ones who you really don't want,
Right.
and anyone who will do, you will take.
Yeah.
And it's probably even more so when you're looking for people that are volunteering to be on boards.
Okay. They're not being picky enough.
Not enough candidates.
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyone else? What helped or hindered it being a good experience?
Hi, I'm Donna. I'm the chairperson of Marlborough. I think change hindered a lot of the activities and the meetings that we had because a lot of our members don't like the slightest bit of change. They're willing to listen, but change is a big thing for me. Right. Else where they, you know.
So not adapting to the new.
The overall changes of the government and things like that.
Okay, right. Anyone else?
I said, like I've been on lots and lots of different boards now, and I've never been on one where there's been an induction process.
Right, okay.
And so we just talked briefly about that.
Yeah.
How it would be good, but there's no how to do that.
Yes, yeah.
In the workshop.
I think from my experience, the average induction process is what's your name and there are the toilets. And it often doesn't go much beyond that, and that doesn't really.
Can I counter that with the fact that there was no induction when I joined, so we brought inductions in, and we found a lot of people were turning away as soon as they came to the induction and saw what was involved.
Right, okay. So, turned off by the requirements. Right, okay. I'll tell you later why that's a good thing.
I found as a new board member that I've never really been on a sort of proper board before and just really had no idea what I was supposed to do. It's sort of taken me at least 2 years to really feel confident to put my hand up or do a whole lot.
Yeah.
And be fair, but more of a, this is
clear about the role, your responsibilities, Great, okay. Well, not so great.
I think in line with that, it's really easy to just say to somebody, oh, it's only a monthly meeting. There's not a lot of reading. There's not a lot more required. And then all of a sudden, they're having to do a whole lot more than they thought was involved. And so exactly, because you're trying to attract people in, you tend to minimise.
Yes.
And
Very common approach.
I've just inducted 2 new trustees and I said, oh look, it's fine, there's not really a lot to do. All of a sudden I thought about how many emails I've sent these people since I've come on board and I thought, I hope they're not regretting it.
Right. Any other thoughts?
Maybe sometimes the expectation of yourself and maybe others that you've kind of got to know everything.
Right.
Whereas maybe, there's some you could delegate some things
Right.
and look at what expertise there is and
Okay.
Over expectation.
Over expectations.
Yeah, I explain. When you're selecting, sometimes if somebody approaches and they want to come on board, I don't know about anyone, sometimes you do a little bit of homework to try and see if your passion and their matches.
Right.
Meets the need that you're looking for.
Yep.
And I'm not sure about the other two people, but I know myself, I'm guilty of over expectation.
Of what the new person will bring?
No, of what we're doing. I mean, where we are, like I said, people we're not all on the same levels because it's peer-led, so, and everybody's on the journey.
Yep.
And I have been in the past over expecting that we would all come together on the same page.
Right.
And it takes a bit of time, and when you over expect, you don't realise just how you can tune people off like that.
Right. Yep.
So I guess just listening to the people above you that know how it goes, or they know what the expectation is, and you go away thinking, no, I've got this.
Yeah.
And then you get back to the other room and you say, oh Christ, what did she say again? And it's like, don't go there, because,
I think there's a flip side of that too, where people are going, right, I want to change the world by joining this board, committee, trust, council, apologies to any councillors present, etc. Where they think, yep, I can make all the difference, and they actually find that they can't.
Right, yep. Wanting to change the world, and sometimes we can recruit people and think that the new people are going to be the saviour. So when an organisation is in trouble, we can see recruitment as the problem-solving technique. Let me do a secret, it rarely is. If you've got a problem before you recruit someone, you'll probably have it after you recruit them too. Okay, so it's an important area because how we recruit people and identifying them, the people who want to be there for the right reasons, and involving and inspiring them, that has a great deal to do with whether the members just sit on the board or serve on the board, whether they just take up space or they make a difference and add to what the organisation is achieving. And this is the recruitment and orientation is one of the kind of key things in that. So there are a couple of really common sand traps in recruitment, some of which have come up in different ways in the topics that you've identified. But in terms of board member recruitment, I think sometimes one of the really common recruitment sand traps that I've come across, I call warm body recruitment. So that is where we lower the expectations to get people in. Someone mentioned that there's not enough candidates, there's not enough people interested, so we keep minimising the expectations until it just becomes a case of if they've got a pulse, they meet all the requirements. The problem with this is they may make a good contribution to the organisation, or they may not. And if they're not, that's a problem for next month, because that's when we talk about getting the wrong people off the board. Because wrong people on the board can not only do nothing, they can actually do positive harm as well. They can infect the kind of culture or ethos of the place and undermine other people's contributions as well.
So when you find those people,
Yeah.
and you know that it needs to be protection of the law,
Yeah.
protecting, say, every month, you go, oh, I'm sorry, but you're not performing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you do, recurring those days or?
That's what we're going to solve next month. Getting the wrong people overboard. So we won't try and tackle everything
Yeah.
this in one night. The other really common sand trap that comes up is that we don't have a particular process for recruiting board members or community members. We just grab people. That sometimes leads to the low expectations or trying to minimise the expectations. The other thing it can lead to is if we don't have clear criteria, often by default we clone ourselves. So if you look around the boards or committees that you're on, you'll find that most of them contain people who look like you and have similar background to you. So it'll be a rare committee that has a range of different perspectives and backgrounds and approaches, because where they do, it usually means someone has had a kind of deliberate process of recruitment rather than just what I would call an accidental board. So that you just, when you have a vacancy, you just try and find someone to fill it. So it takes deliberate effort not to fall into the trap of cloning ourselves. That's why I say that there is another inconvenient truth, and that is that we do get the boards we deserve, because we get the boards that we allowed the recruitment process to generate. So we need to focus on those recruitment processes to make sure we get what we need. And I'm just going to skip this one because I don't really need that, but we do need, oops. So we need to have a recruitment process, or otherwise we end up having an accidental board. So on the placemats, you've got one way of thinking about this recruitment process, the 4 steps there. First of all, it depends on us being clear about what we need. We wouldn't think of recruiting someone for a job without knowing what the job was. So we need to be clear what's the job that we're recruiting these people to, and what do we need at this time, because the board member's job can change over time, and depending on the stage of development of the organisation, depending on the big tasks that you've got ahead of you. Have you got a big building task? Have you got a big fundraising task? Have you got a big rethinking your strategy task? They all can need different kinds of people. But we will always need people who are committed to our cause, because you'll remember back in the very first session, those of you who were here, we talked about how boards add value, and the most crucial way that boards add value to an organisation is by being the values guardians, by being the people who set the direction and protect the mission, vision and values of the organisation. So every board member has to meet that criteria about being committed to the cause, so they will be the guardians of those values, as well as what other kind of qualities we might want to have on top of that. The second thing then is to say, okay, once we've identified what we need, is to think about where do those kind of people hang out? Where will we find those people? Mostly that will come back to people we know, people that others in the organisation know, or people that the people we know, or people that the other people in the organisation know. So it's the kind of ripples of connections. Every now and again it is useful just to throw out to a wider audience. because it gives the opportunity for some fresh imports of people who are not already connected. But often the best way to find people who are committed to the cause are people who are already doing work for the cause. They're involved in some way, or you know them, or they have some other connection, family connection or personal connection with the cause that you're working on. But as I said, it still pays, even though that will most of the time be the pool that we recruit from. It still pays occasionally to try and go beyond that. The story that I tell was really kind of opened my eyes about that was I'm on a board where we had the 2 or 3 people who were the kind of financial brains on the board all resigned pretty much within a 3-month period for a whole lot of separate reasons, not because we were in trouble financially or anything like that. There was just a whole lot of personal things that meant that each of them resigned. So as well as the usual criteria that we had for recruiting these people and wanting people who were committed to what the organisation was trying to achieve, we also wanted people with above average kind of acumen, at least one of them. Because we know that every board member is responsible for the finances, but it helps to have someone inside the board who also has some better knowledge, or otherwise you just become dependent on whoever's preparing your financial reports, the staff or whatever. You don't have that independent oversight, which we'll talk about in November. Anyway, so with this in mind, we thought we wanted at least one person with above average financial acumen. This organisation doesn't actually have a treasurer because it was big enough that all the treasuring jobs were done by staff. There were 3 or 4 people who dealt with the finances to some extent. It wasn't recruiting a treasurer, but probably in other organisations it would be kind of the equivalent of a treasurer that we're recruiting. And that's, I don't know about your experience, but that's usually the hardest position to recruit for. Has that been your experience too? No? You've got treasurers coming out your ears?
No, I've just got this man here and he's been wonderful.
Oh, right, okay.
Ex-accountants are great.
Hang on to him and don't tell anyone else. I don't know about you, but as I said, often I found that one of the harder positions to recruit for. So we were a member in order to get their employment advice of the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce, I think it's called. It's got a weird name. That seems to have one too many adjectives in there or something, anyway. So we thought, well, we will advertise in their newsletter, because if you're a non-profit member, you get free ads in their newsletter. So what we just said was, we're looking for people who would like to achieve big things, change the world, make it a better place, and we're willing to pay no money for it whatsoever. Please apply here. And we had some a little bit more detail, but basically we just thought that was the way to attract people who did want to make a difference. And we were inadvertently using that kind of high expectations approach. In fact, I'll skip ahead to a slide I've got a bit further on, just as an example of this. We basically did our own version of Shackleton's ad. I don't know if you've seen that before, but Shackleton's expedition to the Antarctic. This is not actually the ad, apparently. I thought it was, but they made it up afterwards. But he did recruit people along these lines. So there's a kernel of truth in this urban myth. He said something like, men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honour and recognition in case of success. So he was basically appealing to people's, sense of adventure. So if you want adventurers, that's the best way to do that. And by being demanding and not pretending this was going to be an easy route, and we did our own kind of version of that. And let me tell you the results. The results were we had 12 people put in applications. Have you ever had 12 people apply to be treasurer of your organisation at the same time? Probably 7 or 8 of those were suitable. There were a few that weren't really. There were a couple who were just looking for something for their CV and didn't have much experience actually. But at least 7 or 8 would be quite suitable people. We shortlisted it to, I forget now, it was a few years ago, whether it was 3 or 4 people that were interviewed by the chair and the manager, and selected a fabulous person out of that. And I think the reason was we had opened it up beyond the usual pool, and we appealed to people's better nature and didn't underestimate the tasks, but appealed to people who wanted to actually make a difference. And that paid off. So the woman who was ultimately selected was a chief financial officer with a state-owned enterprise. She in fact didn't know our organisation much beforehand, but the kinds of areas that we worked on, she was clearly quite interested in and impressed us with her commitment to the cause. And so much so that she stayed with our organisation through, she stayed on the board through 2 pregnancies. And I know we've got an example of someone who likes to be pregnant and be on boards at the same time. But that's not a common thing to happen always. And it's a very good excuse to get off a board if you're really looking to get off a board. She stayed through 2 pregnancies, and even when she ultimately moved on, she is still a donor to this day to the organisation. And I think the secret was having those high expectations. We got people who were willing to make high commitments. Okay, so the third bit then is, of course, once you know where those people are hanging out, you need to let them know what you're looking for. So let them know what the criteria is, what the job is. And in a minute, I'll talk to you about how I like to structure this in 3 parts. Now, none of these 3 parts were handed to me on carved in stone tablets. I just made them up, so you can make your own version of this. But I think they cover some of the areas that are really important. And people who are applying for a job need to know what's expected of them if you want to get the right person. And I always like to put this as applying for the job. So it's never a case of finding someone who's willing to be a board member. It's finding someone who's willing to nominate to be considered as a board member. And that's a really big difference in the approach that you take. I think people can smell desperation, and if you are just willing to settle for anything, sometimes some of the most committed people actually aren't interested in the job, because the lower the expectations that you give people about the job, the less important it looks. And basically, good board members want to make a difference. So you need to emphasise that this is a task that we take seriously and that it does make a difference. And then, of course, you have to behave in the board in a way that fulfils that, so that the board does make a difference to the organisation and to achieving the cause. Whereas if we just if we just say that, oh, you know, you just have to turn up to a few meetings and nothing much else, we'll get people who just turn up to a few meetings and nothing much else. And then when we say, well, why didn't you prepare? And they'll resent it because no one told them they had to spend an hour preparing for each meeting. Or when you ask them to come along to the strategic retreat every second year, they'll resent that because no one told them that that was a part of the job. It'll be treated like it's an extra ask. Whereas if we make it part of the basic requirements, people won't question coming along because that's what they signed up for. So if we expect people to be involved in one fundraising activity a year, put that into the basic requirements. If you expect them to come to a retreat every second year or every 6 months, whatever it is, put that into the basic requirements, and then people are much more likely to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the final bit is we need to use that criteria. So we put the criteria up front. We need to use that criteria to select people. Now, often at this point, people will say, well, actually, we don't have the luxury of selecting, or some of you will say, we don't have the luxury of selecting our board members. They're elected by the members. So pretty much, if you're an incorporated society, you will have to have some election process where members elect board or committee or whatever you call them. If you're a charitable trust, you might be able to select them yourselves, or you might have membership that select them. And you might also, depending on how your constitution is written, have other groups who nominate. So some organisations have positions that are nominated by particular groups. So just to give me a bit of an idea in the room, who is an incorporated society and therefore the members, there's an election for your board? Or, or a charitable trust and there's an election for the board? Yeah. Okay. Any organisations where the board, the current board members decide how vacancies will be filled? 2, 3, yeah. 4, yeah. That's usually about that many. Any in the position where another organisation nominates, or another group of people nominate? 1 or 2?
One position.
Right, okay. So does it come from another organisation or from?
From the council, is it?
Right, okay, yeah. Does yours come from an organisation?
There's Brayshaw Park and each of the societies and they nominate person each year.
Yes, yeah. And the other version of this is like the teachers rep on a school board or the students rep on a school board. So it's not an organisation, but it's a particular constituency who nominate. Okay, so it's very easy to say, well, we can't do anything because it's an election, and so we can't decide who will get. But of those of you who do have elections, who has ever worried about who might stand? Anyone ever worried about who might stand? Hopefully all of you. Or you've got an overload of really good candidates standing at all your elections. But so we sometimes worry about it. We sometimes try and organise things behind the scenes. You can also do things quite directly, because both, whether someone is elected or selected, they need to be recruited to stand. So it's just the decision making, the final decision maker is different. If it's a self-perpetuating board, it's the board members themselves who make the final decision. If it's a membership organisation, it's the members who make the final decision. But you've still got to recruit, either way, you've got to recruit someone to stand for the position and decide amongst those who stand. And so this process can still occur under both systems. And in fact, it's probably even more important, I think it's important for both, but it's probably even more important where there's an election, that you are clear about what the criteria is, and that you not only let the people who are standing know about that, but you let the people who are voting know what you think the criteria are. So that you say to the members, this is what the board thinks we need at the moment. This is the kind of criteria we want you to look for when you're deciding who to appoint to the board. Because the sad truth is, if we don't give people criteria, the main criteria they use is, do I know them and are they nice? And known nice could be good board members, or known nice could be bad board members. It becomes a little bit like, how people decide to vote someone off the island. If you don't have criteria, it becomes a kind of popularity competition. When they do have criteria, they call it strategy on voting people off the island. And you've got to have strategy in recruiting people as well. Does that make sense? So, and let the electors know what you think would be a good criteria. Now, it doesn't guarantee they will use that, but I tell you what, I guarantee they won't use it if you don't let them know. They can't use it if they don't know. They'll just default back to popularity contest. Is he a jolly bloke, or is she a nice woman? Does she make nice cakes? Might be the main criteria that people use if they don't know what criteria is actually needed. So we need to spend even more effort for elections, but also I think when we're selecting ourselves to be explicit and even write them down, because when we start writing those criteria down, we have to be much clearer and more agreed as a group. Talking about them, you can kind of fudge differences, but as soon as you start to write them down, it forces an extra degree of clarity. So that's why there's a big advantage in writing these things down. Okay. Before I do this, that's right. So what I'd like you to do now is to think about what criteria do you or should you use in your organisation? So what is the selection criteria? If you're going to write them down to give to the members to vote, if you're going to agree amongst the board, what would be some of the key criteria that you should use or currently use if you've got some good criteria? So we'll do this in pairs. So we've now got 4 at each table. But I think they get better boards by doing so. By writing it down, because it forces you to be clearer about that. Of those small minority, I'll just finish this and then take a question. Of those small minority that do write it down, most use a method that can get you into trouble. It's not that it's wrong, but it is very easy to fall into a couple of traps. And the method goes by various names, but it's most commonly called a skills matrix, where you have a list of attributes down one side and the people across the other. Now, there's nothing wrong with recruiting for skills, but the trap, if it's driven by a skills matrix, is that you can end up with one of each board. So you have one lawyer, one accountant, one social worker, one marketing person, one Maori, one Pacifica, one Asian migrant. And the one of each board doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work together well, and it's not really driven by the most important criteria, which is commitment to the cause. Because in the end, most but not all of those skills can be bought. But the values guardianship role has to be done by someone inside, at the heart of the organisation. You can't buy that off the shelf at the supermarket. And when I say those skills can be bought, it also can be bought for free. You can get a lawyer to do some pro bono work, or an accountant to give you some free advice. There are limits to that, and it's hard. And there's no problem with it being a bonus that people also bring those skills as well as commitment to the cause. But if it's skills matrix driven, you might end up being too fractured a board, or a board that is not really centered around protecting the mission and vision of the organisation. And that can lead to a kind of flipped organisation where it's left to the manager to drive the direction and people make their individual contribution to it. So you reverse the kind of proper accountability roles and have the board as helping the manager. And often those boards end up getting appointed by managers by de facto. The manager selects people who might come on the board. It's its most extreme, and so it turns the organisation upside down. And even that's okay for a while, but the big problem with that model is the manager still has to manage, so they end up either being overloaded and burn out by governing and managing, or they end up being annoyed by all the people micromanaging from the board level. So it can last for a while, but it's not a long-term sustainable model because it reverses the kind of proper accountability roles. So, as I said, there's nothing wrong with recruiting the skills, but not to be driven by a simplistic list of skills. That's a subtle difference, which sometimes people misinterpret what I mean. But as you just heard me say a few moments ago, my example of a good recruitment was for a skill. So I don't underestimate the importance of those skills. And the issue of diversity can come into this as well, because we can have a one of each kind of approach to diversity, and that's also a pretty much in the long term a recipe for failure. It doesn't usually work very well to have a one of each, partly because each of the different groups, there's enormous diversity within them anyway, but also one person left alone to represent a whole point of view often is very isolated and feels unsupported, and it just becomes a kind of competition. I'll come back to the diversity thing later on, so I don't get too distracted by that. But so the important thing is, while we can pay attention to the needs, make sure that we're not just driven by a simplistic list. I want to share with you the three aspects of what I usually use to no, wrong one, sorry. To recruit, here it is. That's the wrong slide. Yes, that's a pretty good face. So my acronym, I like acronyms, you've probably learned by now. My acronym for this is PRE, for preparing for recruiting a board member. And that's, the P stands for what are the personal qualities we want in the board member. R stands for what are their roles that are expected of them, or that they're required to fulfill, and what are the expectations of them in terms of time, task, effort, and whatever. Because all of these things will be different for different boards. Though I found there's for me at least, I've got my favourite personal qualities that I like to see in board members, and I'll share those in a moment. So I'll just talk about the other two bits, the roles and the expectations. So by roles, I mean that you are clear about what you expect the governance tasks to be. So if this is this a really hands-on board, or is this a strategic board? People need to know what that means. Where are you drawing the dividing line between what's the board's role and what's the management role? Different size organisations, different history organisations will draw it at different points. So people need to know as much as you can communicate that beforehand. What is it that applies in this organisation? Are they expected to be hands-on, or are they expected to give the board strategic direction setting only? Does that make sense, the role? And by expectations, I mean, what am I signing myself up for? So, simple things like how often do we meet and how long do we meet, So people should not be surprised that it's a 2-hour meeting, if it is a 2-hour meeting. They should know that beforehand. If they might have thought all meetings come in 1-hour slots, and if no one tells them, then that's what they assume. So if it's a 2-hour meeting usually, say it's a 2-hour meeting. If it's a 3-hour meeting, tell them that, whatever it is. How often you meet, whether that's monthly, quarterly, whatever. How much preparation is expected? Are there papers that are sent out beforehand? How long does it usually take to read and think about the papers if they're going to be a responsible contributing board member? Is there any other preparation that's required before meetings? What are the other responsibilities that board members have? Do they give out certificates to people who go to your workshops, or do they have to come to fundraising events? What are the other expectations, or the strategic retreats that I talked about before? And make those things clear here in the E part of the PRE. And so I like the PRE to be written down and available for people beforehand. And then the big advantage of that is when you get around to doing board self-review, you've already got the criteria against which people are going to do the reviews. Did they meet these expectations? Did they fulfill these roles? Did they demonstrate these qualities? Some organisations, I've never been brave enough to do this myself yet. Maybe when I get older, I'll do it, be brave. Some organisations actually have board members sign up to these personal qualities, roles, and expectations. Literally sign. Just to kind of reinforce how important it is. I've actually even seen one organisation that requires candidates to sign up for it, so that people, even before you stand for a position, you are signing up to the expectations. And I think that's a really neat way of making it clear what people are literally, in this case, signing up for. So I've got an example here of 2 organisations. One is the nomination form, where people sign up for what they're what's expected of them, and also what they can contribute. And on the back is another version of this for a different organisation, which lists the expectations of the board members. And what I like about this version is there's a column that lists the expectations, and next to it is a column that lists how the board will support them to do that. So it's a kind of mutual thing, which I think is a nice sense of balance for it. So they're on flip sides of the same sheet of paper, but I'll just distribute it into this. So there should be plenty left over of that. Okay, so while that's going around, I'll just share with you the personal qualities that I often use when recruiting for board members. And you will add, even I add and subtract to this for different reasons in different organisations, and of course, other board members can have different views. So I'll just read out another. This is an American colleague of mine. This is her version of a similar set of qualities. So she talks about, you'll see some overlap and some differences. Understanding of our community and its needs, passion for our cause, willingness to commit time for board meetings, planning sessions and special events. Team player, works well in a group. Someone who listens well and is thoughtful in considering issues. And I couldn't disagree with that list either. They're quite sensible things. So there's no kind of perfect list, and probably you can come up with a list of 532 qualities that you'd like to get, but it's very hard to recruit for 532 criteria. So sooner or later you've got to try and hone it down to a handful that you can recruit to. So my version, as you can see on the board, hopefully, is commitment to the cause, common sense and good judgment, openness and respect for the group, ability to raise difficult issues in a firm but helpful way, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and a sense of humour. Because I think often when you can laugh at something, you can get through any kind of difficulty. So they're just, you can pick your own ones, and you can alter them for different boards, but they're the kind of things that would come under the personal qualities that I would look for. Now I cut across you before.
I just want to ask a couple of questions. Your skill set that you were talking about just before.
Yeah.
So with our board and our membership, our charity is governed by the board, but our membership is believe relative to the
Yep.
So, our services changing all the expectations of our services changing all the time because of deactivation.
Yep.
Really big part for us.
Yes.
So when we go to audit in the past, when we've had an audit done, they suggest a lot, they can say, well, this is our suggestion, so this is how what we should be looking for.
Yeah.
But given that our service is totally based for mental health, people on the mental health journey,
Yep.
and those people are our membership who actually, due to a constitution that was written up a long time ago, trying to get, because they like to have membership apply for coming on the board or to be voted on the board, but trying to get that understanding to get to where the board needs to be is sometimes awfully hard when everybody's on such a high, low level of understanding.
So so for your organisation, obviously one of the key criteria that you're looking for is life experience of the issue that you're working on, and that's okay to be a key criteria as well. That's something that you would probably put in for all of your board positions. And you also want people who are committed to your approach and your philosophy and values as well. And then there might be other kinds of skills that you want, but also the particular skills the organisation can buy. So if it needs legal advice, you don't necessarily have to have a legally qualified board member to fulfil your legal responsibilities. You can get that advice separately. But probably it sounds like one of the key issues of being clear to your members in who they select or who they elect to go on there is what are the personal qualities and what's the role of these people, and make it clear that we want people who can fulfil this role, this governance role. And as I said, giving people criteria is no guarantee you'll get back a perfect match, but it's a much better guarantee than giving them nothing. And you tend to get better results because most people, most of the time, want the best for the organisation. The people who are out there to get you are really small and infrequent in number. Anything they want to do the best. So if people are coming with goodwill and saying this is what we need, this is what the job entails, so we need people who can do these things. Do forward planning, have strategic overview, have a long-term perspective, etc., etc. then I think that can help with any constituency.
Because we do have that, we have before we elect, there is a written up criteria for.
Right, great. You're one of the rare ones.
I think we could take, you know, the ladies and the manager for that one.
Right, yeah.
It's really hard
Yeah.
when you're new to doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you do it with passion, you forget.
Yes.
Not everybody else.
No, that's what.
We've all got different reasons for being on.
Yes, yeah.
And I think, well, for all of us, really, it's all about either our members, our board members are living the journey.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
walking up, or it's about empathy, walking
Yeah,
lane,
yeah.
it was about family and empathy.
Yes, family experience. The other thing that I've done some work with consumer-led mental health groups before with their boards, and one of the things that comes up time and again is having a pre-agreed plan for when someone is not well. So when a board member is not well, so that they agree what will be the steps that will lead them to standing down for going on leave, and that's talked about when everyone's fine and happy. Because in the middle of a crisis or something going wrong is the worst time to talk about those things. But talking about those things up front, and I'm not an expert in this field, you obviously know much more about it than me, but I understand overall the approach in the kind of recovery model is that you talk about signs of things not going so well and let other people know and accept feedback, identify people who give you feedback that, you know, things are not going so well, so this is a warning signal that you might need some help or whatever. And we can apply the same thing from the personal wellness journey to the board, I think. And I've seen that work.
Because we put a lot of pressure on our manager, you know.
Yes, yeah.
Like, for the chair, I'm kind of always looking to our manager for a helping hand.
Yeah,
because the rest of our boarders, I guess we just haven't learned it all yet.
Yeah.
And to be responsible for that is a big one.
It is, yeah.
A real big thing.
Yeah. And these organisations can end up having big budgets too. It's not trivial.
I'm trying to run the board there, or trying to do what's right for the community, our charity, the member, and also stick to the rules of who's funding us and the rest of that. All these ways of looking after kids. But very enjoyable. This is really helpful.
Okay, great. So as I said, it's rare for organisations to write this stuff down and to have agreed criteria. So this is one way you can get into the top 10% just by doing that. You'll get the top 10%. And of those who write it down, they might not cover all three, P, R, and E, the personal qualities, the roles, and the expectations. Interestingly, the one that is often left out is the expectations. And that can be really important because it gets people who are willing to do the work. My approach to board recruitment is I would much rather have an empty chair than someone who isn't actually prepared to do the work, filling it or blocking it. Because as we'll find out next month when we talk about the next topic, it is harder to get someone out of a chair who shouldn't be there than to get them in it in the first place. So it is better to be patient and to have vacant positions than to have the wrong person in the position. And I also think the personal qualities, we tend to do this intuitively, but that means we do it individually. So the board as a whole often doesn't have these conversations about personal qualities. So there's not a collective view, which I think adds value to it. So it tends to happen because intuitively we know the personal qualities actually will determine whether this is going to work or not. So we do apply them, but we tend to do it secretly in our own head. 9 times out of 10. But if we could have the discussion as a board and write it down, as I said, then that'll shoot you up into the top 10% of recruiting boards. Okay, there's just one more quick thing. No, 2 quick things I want to talk about in our last 10 or 15 minutes. And that is when not to recruit. This list comes from the same person I quoted her personal qualities that she looks for. Hildy Gottlieb. This comes from her as well. This is her list of examples of when it's the wrong time to recruit a new board member. When we don't, as a board, understand board accountability and who's responsible for what. When the board is either too micromanaging or too disengaged, and we haven't got that balance right. When we've got a board who just doesn't work as a team. When we've got poor board staff relations. When we've got no plan for where we want to go. We've got no policies for how we want to do it. When we've got no recruitment criteria or processes. When we've got no orientation or training to support new board members in place. Finally, when the manager is doing all the recruiting of the board member. Managers should be consulted, but in the end, it's the board's responsibility to identify what the board needs. So basically what she's saying there is, don't use recruitment to solve other problems or other deficits in the governance of the organisation. It's tempting to think if I only got the right people, if I only got a couple more people, it would solve everything. Usually what it does, it just repeats the current problem. And what she firmly advises is what she calls fix it first. Fix the problem that needs to be addressed first and then recruit people. Otherwise you end up recruiting people into a bad system or a bad culture, and it's very hard to get out of that. Okay. Yes.
It's been on my mind the whole time we've been talking tonight about the dangers of the manager recruiting.
Yeah.
Because especially when you said, we're going to attract that, we're going to mention that person who's just like us.
Yeah.
And that isn't a role for the manager, is it? Like recruiting.
No.
So
I think it's useful. I think it's useful to talk to the manager about this, because they will have insights into the organisation. They'll be a great sounding board for the board, and they're a key insider to be a part of the conversation. But in the end, it's the board's role to do this, or otherwise you're putting the manager in a really difficult position, because nowhere else do you get to recruit your own employers. You can be consulted about them, what qualities are needed, and I think that's really useful and very important, and have great contribution to make. But it's just turning the whole accountability system upside down when you abdicate the responsibility, and it's not fair on the manager because it leaves them very exposed to accusations. Oh, well, you just handpicked. There's no independent oversight. So it leaves them in a very exposed position as well. Or in a very powerful position. Yes, yeah, and it's also open to abuse. Yeah, but even more than abuse, what I see as the result is burnout, because managers tend to be better at identifying other good managers or people who do the managing bit of the role well, and so you end up with another bunch of managers instead of a bunch of governors, and and then the full-time manager, or the resident manager, needs to take on the governance role as well of setting the direction and guarding the values, because the people are more interested in the operational issues. And give good advice. That the upside is you've got a great council of advisors, but you don't have a board. Does that make sense about that? Okay, so what I'd just like to do for the last 5 minutes is just in pairs, see if you can identify one improvement to your recruitment process that you would take away. Now, those of you who've got no recruitment process, this will be a very easy task to do. I'm sure you can pick one thing you could do out of it. Those of you who've got a really well-developed one might have to think, but any system can always be improved. So I want to challenge everyone to find one thing that they could do to improve their recruitment process. And what I'd like you to do, if you're willing, is to take this back to your board and look if you can introduce that now, not when you're recruiting. Because when you're in the heat of recruitment, it's really hard to look at the big picture and keep things in perspective. You actually want to get the person started or whatever, and it's much harder to do a change then. So the best time to develop your recruitment process is when you don't need to recruit anyone. So see if you can think of one step you could take to improve, and share that in pairs where you are through some of the stuff. Last task. There are also expectations that you can see as part of the on-the-job learning as well. So people don't need to come fully formed, but they might need to come prepared to learn something. So I'm aware of one organisation that has an expectation. Now this might seem bizarre, but they have an expectation that all board members can understand a financial report and what it means. They don't expect people to come with that skill, so they offer a little mini training course. It's not a course on being an accountant. This is a course on knowing the difference between a profit and loss, what the different statements actually mean, the difference between assets and income. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, and liabilities. Yeah. And also the difference between your income flow and what you've got. So it's fairly at a fairly simple level, but they expect every board member to have that knowledge or be willing to learn it. And they actually even have a test. So they test each of the board members after they've had the course, and if they pass, that's great. And if they don't pass, they get the opportunity to do the course again until they learn. Again, this has been one of the things that I've really admired but never been brave enough to do myself. So there may be some people in the room who are brave enough to do that. If we take it seriously that people should be able to understand what they're accountable for these financial reports, so for financial performance of the organisation, then maybe we should take it seriously.
How big was the organisation?
It was not a big organisation. It was probably it could have been 500,000 or something like that. It was not a micro organisation, but it was not employing hundreds. So the accounts were fairly simple, but it was just teaching people what the difference between cash and accrual means, and why these things appear on there, and to know whether they were going well or not going well. Basically, that was the basics. And so both the little workshop and the test was not at a high level. It was basic, what we would reasonably expect contributing board members to do. The trouble is, I think sometimes in organisations we just expect the treasurer to do that and no one else, and that puts a lot of pressure on one person, and we just hope someone else is doing it as well. Okay, so I've got my prize for the best colouring in tonight, and remember, keep your placemats.